From the nation's capital, the Conservative Caucus presents Conservative Roundtable, an in-depth look at today's most important issues.
Welcome to Conservative Roundtable. I'm Howard Phillips, chairman of the Conservative Caucus, which sponsors these broadcasts, now being aired in more than 120 communities across the United States. Excuse me. We have as our guest for this broadcast a man whom I've been privileged to know for many years, back to his days in Wisconsin, Al Regnery, now the publisher of the American Spectator, and he has a great new book called Upstream. We have much to discuss. You've heard of Regnery Publishing. Al comes from a publishing family. Tell us a little bit about the history of the Regnery family in publishing.
Well, my father came from a textile family, actually, and after World War II, he was working in the family business and was bored with it. And he had studied at Harvard and MIT and well-educated and was more of an intellectual than you need to be, I suppose, to work in the textile business. And so he decided to start a book publishing company. He was concerned about current affairs. He had actually studied in Germany before World War II and had seen the growth of fascism, Nazism there, and as he said, the growth of big government and the things big government could do. After World War II, he was concerned about the way we were lining up with our former allies, the Soviet Union particularly, and the way we were treating the rest of Europe, and so he thought that the best way to influence public opinion would be to publish books. And so he started the Henry Regnery Company, it was then called, in 1947. The first book that he published was called Blueprint for World Conquest, and it was a collection of the documents that had formed the Communist International, the Soviet Union, which were not available. And soon after that, he published a couple of Frida Utley's books, the early ones. Then one of his first big books was God and Man at Yale by Bill Buckley, which was published in 1951. And after that, there were a string of literally hundreds of conservative books that he published, other books as well. I took over the company in 1986, and I ran it until about 3 or 4 years ago. While I was there, it grew a lot. We actually published, when I was there, 22 New York Times bestsellers.
It's been fabulously successful. To what do you attribute that tremendous spurt and success?
Well, we had a big string of bestsellers, and actually the Clinton administration was pretty good to us. We did 9 different books about the Clintons that all made the bestseller list. But I guess it's just a matter of figuring out where your market is and the kinds of books to publish and how to promote them. Of course, the first rule is that you need to publish good books. Content is important in anything you do. And so we were lucky, I think, in many ways in lining up the books that we did, and they were, many of them, very successful.
And it's still doing well, even
still
after
doing
your
very well.
departure.
Yeah, I left 3 or 4 years ago. When I turned 60, I just decided that I had published books for 20 years, and that was long enough. And so the American Spectator magazine was in trouble, didn't seem to have much of a future, and I thought it would be a pretty good challenge to see if I could rejuvenate it, take it over, bring it back, and we've done that, actually. Since in the last 4 years, it's become it's grown by a huge amount, and we're doing very well.
That's great. Your book, Upstream, is a history of the modern conservative movement.
Upstream,
tell us about it.
Upstream, The Ascendance of American Conservatism is the title. I spent about 2 years writing this book, and
how many hours a day?
Well, in the evenings and the early mornings when I wasn't working, I don't know how many hours a day, but weekends, I spent a lot of time on it. I spent a lot of time interviewing people, reading things. And Howard, I guess you probably recognize this as much as I do. There were a couple of things that concerned me. First of all, there are thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of young conservatives in this country who certainly have pretty good beliefs, but many of them have no idea why. They don't know what the difference between various kinds of conservatives are. They don't know what the origins of the movement are. They really, in many cases, don't really know what the principles are, where those came from. So I wanted to address that and write a book that was accessible, that was readable by somebody who was not an intellectual, who could understand the foundations of the movement, the intellectual structure and foundation, the politics, the people that had made it work, and so on. And the other thing is that, as you know, there is a huge amount of misinformation, just things that are sort of the conventional wisdom that are wrong about the conservative movement. And I thought that since I had been involved in it for so many years, I've been in a good many of the places where interesting and important things were happening. I've known most of the players, or many of them anyway, and so I thought I had a pretty good grasp of the way the whole thing fit together, and that I could probably dispel some of those misconceptions. And one thing I did, I was privileged to have access to a lot of the people that were the leaders of the movement, and so I took considerable amount of time with a tape recorder, went to see these people, sat down with them in some cases for 3 or 4 hours, and recorded interviews. In fact, I interviewed Bill Buckley for 2 whole days.
Wow.
And he was very generous with his time, and in fact, I just looked at the transcript of that.
Well, you got him started, or your dad did, with God Man.
That's right, he did. And so I've known him since I was 7 or 8 years old, and so I was, again, I had access to him, but he was very generous, as I say, with his time, and I think the transcript is some 50 pages long. And we go through all sorts of things that he explained and people that he talked about and whatnot. And there were many other people, too. I mean, people like Milton Friedman and Bill Rusher and Pat Buchanan and Paul Laxalt, and on and on. There were many people, but most of them I knew anyway. And so those interviews...
You worked for Senator Laxalt.
I did. And those interviews, anyway, became one of the ways I dispelled things that were wrong. Really going back to the original sources, in other words. Your friend Paul Weyrich interviewed me the other day, and I thought, honored by his saying in the interview that it was the first of these books that he'd read that actually got it right. So
that's quite an accomplishment.
It is. Yeah,
now,
about that.
Did you have an editor? Did someone review your writing?
I did. I had actually my own editor, who I had used when I was publishing books, who also knew the topic very well, and I would give her each chapter as I finished it. And I also had a research assistant who was helping me dig things out, a graduate student, and I would give each chapter to the editor. She would go through it, question things, suggest things, move things around, and I would take it back, and then I actually gave it to her a second time, so she edited the whole book twice.
How many pages did it have before it was cut down?
Well, I don't know, because it never was in that format. I mean, some of the chapters actually probably got longer, some of them got shorter. I think actually it probably turned out to be more or less the same number of pages that I'd written originally. I mean, again, as I say, I added some, subtracted some. It's got a substantial appendix, a big bibliography, and so on. So with all those other things.
Now, are people treating you fairly in terms of giving you television and radio interviews?
Oh, yeah. It's only been out for 2 weeks, and I have been probably on 40, 45 radio and television shows so far, interviews with all sorts of people. It's had only a couple of good reviews so far. No bad reviews yet.
What was the original print run?
50,000.
Wow.
And also, I should say that we didn't publish it ourselves. When I decided to write the book, I told my friends at Regnery that they couldn't see the manuscript. I wasn't going to show it to them. Instead, I took it I had a literary agent, and so we shopped it around New York, and ultimately Simon & Schuster published it.
And what does it take for a book to make the New York Times bestseller list? How many must
Well,
be
it's
sold?
not a number, just a cold number of books. It's measured by the books that are selling the fastest during a given week. And so if it's 2 weeks before Christmas, it's a lot more books than it is the middle of July. So it all depends on how many you sell in a short period of time.
And do you have plans for another book to add items that you weren't able to include
Well,
in
you
this
know,
one?
Howard, you could write 6 volumes on this topic. And one of the problems is you have to figure out where do you stop and what do you include and what don't you include. And I recognized from the beginning that, you know, the old saw in Washington, when somebody picks up a book that's something that they know about, they're going to go to the index. And I said there are going to be a lot of disappointed people because I can't list everybody. I can't have everybody in the index. And in fact, I've had 2 or 3 people sort of murmur, how could you possibly write this book without having interviewed me? And So there are a lot of people in the index, nevertheless, and a lot of things come up. But in terms of another book, I don't know. I took all the best things, I guess, in this book. There's still plenty to say. There's no.
Who gave you the title?
I was my title. I thought that up.
And you're pleased with it?
I am. Upstream, really, I thought it meant a couple of different things. For one thing, I don't have to tell you this, it's always been a struggle. It always will be a struggle. What conservatives are doing is basically challenging liberalism, and liberals like to think that they control the world, they control the United States, they control the intellectual life, politics, and whatever, and we are definitely a thorn in their side. And so that's certainly one of the things that I cover extensively.
We'll be right back after these messages with more from Al Regnery, the publisher of American Spectator. The very first clause in the Constitution, Article 1, Section 1, immediately following the preamble, asserts that all legislative powers herein granted shall be vested in a Congress of the United States consisting of a Senate and a House of Representatives. All legislative powers, that means you cannot give other entities the power to legislate, not the United Nations or the World Bank or the International Monetary Fund or the federal judiciary or regulatory agencies or federally funded private organizations. If you're going to stick to the Constitution, only the Congress can make policy, and the Conservative Caucus works to assure that Congress will more nearly conform to the Constitution.
The Conservative Caucus, www.conservativeusa.org, 703-938-9626.
Here's how you can become a citizen lobbyist and influence how your representatives vote. Write a letter to your congressmen and senators. Speak out on a call-in talk radio program. Write a letter to the editor of your local newspaper, and call the Conservative Caucus for more information at 703-938-9626.
More than the entire population of Cincinnati. More than all the men and women in the Marine Corps. More than 4 times the number of unemployed auto workers. Since 1980, over 500,000 Americans who make clothing and home fashions have lost their jobs because we don't realize the impact of buying imported goods. So if you think looking for the Made in the USA label doesn't matter,
next,
it matters.
Thank you. Thank you.
thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, guys.
Thanks a lot for all you guys have done.
Thank you.
Thank you for everything.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Welcome back. I'm Howard Phillips with Alfred Regnery, the author of Upstream, the publisher of American Spectator, and also the host each year of one of the most delightful events in which I'm ever privileged to take part, the Pumpkin Papers Irregulars. Tell us about that and how it gets started.
Well,
what is it?
It's a dinner that's held every Halloween to honor the memory of Whittaker Chambers, the former communist who broke with the Communist Party in the 30s, who subsequently testified against Alger Hiss, who was a top aide to Roosevelt, had been an assistant secretary of state in the State Department, and who was a communist and a spy.
And wrote the UN Charter.
And he was actually the first temporary chairman of the United Nations. Was with Roosevelt at Yalta, influenced him significantly, and ultimately went to jail. Not for espionage, actually for perjury, because the statute of limitations had run. But this dinner was started 25 years ago. It used to be held alternately in New York, San Francisco, and Washington. And it was practically out of business about 12 or 15 years ago, I guess. And I took it over, and we kept it going. We do it, as I say, every Halloween.
It's a sellout.
sell out. About 150 people come. We always have a prominent speaker. I think every director, at least the good guy directors of the CIA has spoken, directors of the FBI, chairman of the Senate Intelligence Committee, other people that are heavily involved in intelligence and foreign policy. And we have a few other things that go on. It's always it's a great deal of fun.
Lighting of the Great Pumpkin.
We light the pumpkin, and somebody does that who's honored in doing so, and we poke a lot of fun at some people.
What's the story of the pumpkin? Why don't you share that with our viewers?
Well, we have a carved pumpkin, and of course the Pumpkin Papers is named for the fact that when Whittaker Chambers was testifying before this House Un-American Activities Committee, I guess it was, there was a young California congressman that was the one who sort of took the lead, a guy named Richard Nixon, who nobody had heard of. And Chambers was concerned that he had these documents, which actually had been, which he had taken from when he was a communist, which actually Hiss had used to give to the Russians. He had copies of, microfilm copies of them. And he was afraid that the Soviet, some Soviet types would steal these, and without those documents, he would been shown as a liar himself and couldn't prove his case. So he took the microfilm and he hid it in a hollowed-out pumpkin at his farm up in Westminster, Maryland, and then he took Nixon and a couple of FBI agents up to the farm and walked out into the pumpkin patch, pulled off the top, and produced these. This microfilm of these State Department documents. And with those documents, basically, he proved his case. And so he became the hero, at least, to the anti-communists, and Hiss became the villain. One of the interesting...
He famously said that he was leaving the winning side, going to the losing side.
Right, he did. Hiss was always sort of the hero of the left. And there are all sorts of implications.
His son Tony became editor of the Harvard Crimson.
That's right. Hiss got out of jail. Actually, the state of Massachusetts reinstated his lawyer's license, his bar license, and the left would never really challenge him. I mean, it's a very interesting case. Hiss continued to lie for the rest of his life that he claimed he was not a member of the Communist Party, he was not a spy, and there's absolutely conclusive proof that he was. I mean, there's just absolutely no doubt whatsoever.
And who was it, Tannenhouse, who wrote a book? Or was it Alan Weinstein?
Well, Alan Weinstein wrote the first book, and he set out to prove that Hiss was innocent. As he got further and further into it, he changed his tune and said Hiss was guilty. And there have been dozens of other books written about it. When we began to get into the KGB files and the GRU files, people found out that there were all sorts of references to Hiss. And in fact, as I say, no question he's guilty. But even so, the left continues to claim that he's innocent. One of the things that we do is we give a prize called the Victor Novoski Prize. Victor Novoski is the old editor of The Nation magazine and one of America's great old leftists, and he has been probably the most prominent defender of Alger Hiss. And the joke that we always tell is that even if Hiss were to have confessed, Victor Novoski would still say that he was innocent. So.
Let's talk about the American Spectator. Mm-hmm. It's a terrific magazine, and I'm sure you enjoy overseeing it. How do you determine what will be in the magazine? There are certain regular features. I always enjoy reading Ben Stein with his egocentric articles, which are always fascinating and humorous. And Tom Bethel always has a great column in there. You have certain regulars, but how do you select the content of the magazine?
Well, we with the editors and all the younger writers, and it is a magazine, I should say, that emphasizes bringing in young writers, training them, and sending them out into the world where they can join the mainstream media. But we have a weekly editorial meeting, and we sit around and we think about whatever's going on and what happens to interest people. Sometimes people approach us and have an idea for an article. Other times we go to them and suggest things, sort of depending, as I say, what's happening in the world. We're presently doing a 10-part series on individual liberty and what the origins of it are and what it means today. Those are longer articles, 5,000-word articles, and we've gotten some of the most prominent people in the world actually doing those articles. People like Bob Bork and Paul Johnson and Ann Applebaum and a lot of others. So that takes a piece of the magazine. And otherwise, we always try to keep it humorous, to keep it lighthearted. There's always a good deal of sort of funny stuff in the magazine, and the funny stuff, I guess, we define as primarily poking fun at liberals, which is a pretty good-sized target, big target, and we have a lot of fun doing that, and I think it probably makes a lot of sense, too. The magazine's doing well.
Now, is it supported mainly by contributions to your C3, or is it advertising?
It's a combination. It's we certainly sell advertising, we sell subscriptions, but any serious magazine that talks about serious issues doesn't make money, and so we are a nonprofit, and we get contributions from lots of different places to keep it going.
Do many people submit manuscripts for your consideration?
Quite
articles?
a few. Yeah, we also have a daily website, and of course with that we're able to publish many more things. It goes up every day, and there are 5 or 6 articles on the website, and so we can accommodate those more. And magazines, yeah, we do get a fair number of things that just come in over the transom.
One of the things, I'm sure, I haven't read your book yet, but I'm sure that some reference at least is made to it, is how the movement has gone from nothing to something.
Well, that is really that's the essence of the book.
I mean, it's so many magazines.
Well, when the book starts just after World War II, at which point there were no conservatives. Big government, statism was the idea that people thought was going to be the wave of the future. The United Nations had been formed, and sort of the idea was that would take care of foreign policy, and there were no conservatives. And what the book does is to explain how we went from that point to the point where we have this huge conservative movement. We have dozens of magazines, blogs, websites, newspapers, politicians, and they say sometimes looking at the conservative cause, it seems like it's pretty grim, but by the same token, it really is probably the most active part of the American political life.
The liberals haven't had a new idea in decades.
No, that's right.
The intellectual ferment in this country comes from conservatives.
Right, which is exactly the opposite. I mean, back in the 40s, there's a famous statement by Lionel Trilling saying there's no conservative idea at all. And now many liberals are saying the same thing about themselves. So it is a phenomenal story of how this happened and how one thing led to another. I mean, it's amazing how interrelated things are, and how really a relatively small number of people had this huge influence on American politics and American culture.
Before we go to another break, since Reagan, there really hasn't been any thematic conservative leadership in high office.
Not in politics. But you can't, I keep telling people, don't measure the strength of the movement by politics, because politics comes and goes, and people win elections for all sorts of reasons or lose them. But the ideas, the fundamentals of conservatism, the foundation is still in great shape. There are people that are writing things and are talking about things that are really just as profound as they ever were.
We're going to take one more break before we get you back. There was a period when everyone agreed, almost everyone, the Soviet Union was a threat. And today the focus is on, quote-unquote, Islamo-fascism. I personally am concerned that there's so little focused interest on the real threat we face from communist China in many ways, not just economic, but militarily. And if Taiwan becomes a target for Beijing, there's a question as to whether or not we will have the ability to keep our promises to preserve an independent Taiwan. Stay with us. We'll be right back with Al Regnary following these messages. The Conservative Caucus is working to raise up a new generation of leaders who understand the principles of the Founding Fathers as set forth in the Constitution of the United States. In Article 1, Section 8, it says, Congress shall have the power to coin money and regulate the value thereof and of foreign coin, and to fix the standard of weights and measures. Congress has abdicated that duty, that responsibility, to the Federal Reserve, which now, by inflating the money supply on a continuing basis, each day taxes us more than Congress does by diminishing the value of our savings and our earnings. The Conservative Caucus, almost alone among national conservative organizations, is working to restore constitutional government, whether the issue is money or something else.
www.conservativeusa.org, 703-938-9626.
Welcome back. I'm Howard Phillips. If you're interested in the kinds of issues we discuss on Conservative Roundtable, you might want to get more information from the Conservative Caucus. Our website is www.conservativeusa.org. And if you will fax us your name and address, we'll send you some samples of our literature covering things such as the UN Law of the Sea Treaty, the Security and Prosperity Partnership, the North American Union, immigration issues, other things in which we're involved. Our fax number is 703-281-4108. And if you'd like to learn more about Al Regnery, his book, Upstream, about his magazine, American Spectator, check out the contact information on the screen. Al, what do you see as the future of the conservative movement, given the fact that we do not have, as the likely Republican presidential nominee, someone who could be fairly characterized as a conservative?
Well, we don't this time, although, as you know, Howard, conservatives have been in this kind of a fix before, and many times. This is one of the things I talk about in my book, that we get badly defeated and we come back, and 3 or 4 years later, we win. And as I said before, I think that the foundation of conservatism, the ideas that we hold, those are the things that prevail. Politicians don't, public policies don't really so much, but ideas thrive and they last. They're the things that ultimately change things. And our ideas are still in very good shape. And so people will emerge, politicians will come along who will be able to probably come up to the top again. In the meantime, you have somebody like John McCain. The conservative movement has the capability of holding that person's feet to the fire. You don't always win, but we have an awful lot of people out there who are willing to do all the things you have to do to influence people, and that's what we have to do.
That's a good note on which to end. See you again at the next broadcast of Conservative Roundtable.